Our centering words this morning speak of a longing to go home someplace, a place we only catch a glimpse of from time to time. The place, eco-theologian Starhawk says, is community. This morning I am speaking to you from my own little home someplace. My mother's garden in the backyard of the house I grew up in Connecticut. One of the magical things about this garden is that in its multiple years of growth, the diversity of this eco-community has brought many neighbors and many strangers into the life of my family. The garden has brought butterflies and bees, deer and snakes. The compost pile that is behind the garden has brought thousands of worms and even a few brown bears. My mother has befriended 2 hummingbirds that feed every day and also has met her share of mosquitoes and ticks that have been swatted away or picked off. This large ecosystem has created a community full of plants and animals and humans that both have received and give gifts of life to each other. This one plot of land in this one small backyard is a living, breathing example of the kind of beauty that can come into the world when deep, diverse community is nurtured. What happens when a neighbor flower gives to a neighbor bee, and a neighbor human receives fertile soil from a neighbor composting worm? Besides my gardener mother, another expert in community building that I look up to is Presbyterian minister Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, like my mother, believes that community happens, neighborhoods happen, when we all help each other in some way. Every person, whether they give help or receive help, becomes in relationship with each other through that act of giving and receiving. In the beloved community that Mr. Rogers created via a television screen, there is an expression of so many types of communal beauty. Our scripture this morning tells of the apostles Paul and Barnabas also going out into the world to build community. Paul travels throughout the book of Acts to so many towns that now we struggle to pronounce their names each week. But this week, our scripture in Acts 15 speaks of Paul and Barnabas going to Jerusalem for a council, a tough conversation that is to decide who is included in Christian community and who is excluded from community. So when Paul and Barnabas arrive into Jerusalem for this tough conversation, they are welcomed by the church there. Although they were coming to town for this conflict-driven conversation, the community opened their arms and welcomed. The welcome of Jerusalem brings us to our exciting gathering this morning as we welcome 5 new Westmoreland Service Corps interns into our community. For 30 years and more, Westmoreland has supported young people to serve in the broader DMV area and enter into deep communal relationships with each other. and the congregation and all of the neighbors around us that we do not yet know. Just as the people of Jerusalem opened their arms for Paul and Barnabas, and the flowers of my mother's garden opened their petals to sun and rain, this morning we open our hearts to the new Westmoreland cohort of interns. This year will be a unique service corps experiment in attempting to build community amidst pandemic and social upheaval. However, we have learned in the past months that human connection will continue to overcome the struggles of this current reality. For me, it's an important reminder that so many years ago, Mr. Rogers welcomed people. He built neighborhood through a screen. It was a television screen, of course. It was not a laptop with keys and Zoom mute buttons, but it was a neighborhood despite physical being. And that call of "won't you be my neighbor" rings deep in our hearts, although we may not meet our neighbors in person for a while. So now I have the joy and pleasure to introduce our 5 new Westmoreland Service Corps interns and give our community a chance to hear about this life that we will enter in together and listen to the communities and neighbors that our Service Corps interns will soon become.